To live as a dark angel is to exist inside a contradiction so profound that it slowly devours the soul. They are praised as noble defenders of mankind, revered as ancient heroes clad in green ceramite, spoken of in reverent whispers across the Imperium. Yet beneath that image lies a life shaped not by glory, but by fear. Not fear of the enemy, nor fear of death, but fear of truth. Fear of one's own brothers. Fear of what must never be spoken aloud. From the moment a warrior takes the sigil of the Dark Angels upon his armor, he inherits a legacy that is not merely heavy, it is crushing. Every space marine is forged through pain, indoctrination, and sacrifice, but the Dark Angels are different. Their suffering does not end with ascension. It begins there. Where other chapters offer brotherhood and clarity of purpose, the Dark Angels offer silence. Questions are discouraged. Curiosity is punished. Knowledge is rationed like a forbidden drug, administered only when the mind has proven itself capable of carrying yet another unbearable weight. To survive among them, one must learn an unspoken truth: ignorance is safety, and understanding is danger. The Imperium believes the Dark Angels are paragons of discipline, the Emperor's unwavering knights. That belief is carefully maintained, polished, and weaponized. But the reality is far more unsettling. Within their ranks, trust is conditional and temporary. Every word spoken may be weighed. Every action observed. Every brother is both shield and potential executioner. There are secrets layered upon secrets, circles within circles, each more isolated than the last. Advancement does not mean honor. It means exposure. It means being allowed to see something you can never unsee. The Dark Angels were the first legion, created to be perfect, unleashed when subtlety failed and annihilation was required. That legacy still haunts them. To be first is to be watched more closely, to be judged more harshly, to be denied the mercy of forgetting. Their history is ancient, older than most chapters, older than many worlds still burning under endless war. And buried deep within that history is a fracture so severe that it never healed, only sealed over, wrapped in ritual, prayer, and blood. A Dark Angel learns early that there are words never spoken, names never uttered, symbols never questioned. There are chambers within their fortress monasteries that most will never enter, and prayers whispered in those chambers that sound less like devotion and more like confession. Some brothers disappear without explanation. Others return changed, quieter, their faith sharpened into something cold and absolute. No one asks why. Asking is dangerous. Asking implies doubt. And doubt, within the Dark Angels, is a sin greater than failure. Their war is not only against the enemies of mankind. It is against memory, against history, against the terrifying possibility that the Imperium might one day learn what they have spent 10,000 years concealing. Every battle they fight, every world they defend, every victory they claim is haunted by the same question echoing silently in their minds: will this be the moment the truth escapes? Will this be the war where silence finally fails? To an outsider, the Dark Angels appear stoic and reserved. To those who fight beside them, they are unsettling allies, efficient, merciless, and prone to vanishing without explanation when circumstances demand it. Entire campaigns have been abandoned, critical wars left unfinished, all because of whispers only the Dark Angels could hear. Whispers of something old, something unforgiven, something that matters more to them than the survival of billions of Imperial lives. The Imperium does not know this. It cannot know this. And the Dark Angels will kill to ensure it never does. This is the true horror of their existence. Not the monsters they slay, nor the endless wars they endure, but the knowledge that their greatest enemy wears the same armor they do. That their chapter's greatest shame still breathes somewhere in the darkness of the galaxy. That redemption, if it exists at all, may only come through suffering so complete it erases everything they are. They are not seeking forgiveness. They are enforcing silence. And yet, they endure. They kneel in prayer beneath banners older than empires. They recite litanies whose meanings have been deliberately obscured. They march to war carrying relics soaked in a history no longer written honestly. Each dark angel tells himself the same lie, that his duty is pure, that his loyalty is unbroken, that whatever secrets his chapter carries must be justified by survival. It is a comforting lie. It is also the most dangerous one. Because to be a dark angel is to accept that some sins are so vast they cannot be redeemed, only hidden. That loyalty can become obsession. That honor can become a cage. And that the price of belonging is not merely your life, but your conscience. This is not a story of heroic sacrifice. This is a story of what happens when devotion outlives truth. This is the horrifying life of the Dark Angels. Before the Dark Angels became a legend wrapped in silence, before secrecy hardened into doctrine, there was expectation, crushing, absolute expectation. The Emperor did not create the First Legion to inspire hope. He created them to endure what others could not. Where diplomacy failed and annihilation was required, the First Legion was unleashed. They were the blade kept sheathed until restraint no longer mattered. And from the very beginning, that purpose shaped not only how they fought, but how they lived, how they thought, and how they learned to fear themselves. To understand the horror of the Dark Angel's existence, you must first understand what it means to be first. The first to be created. The first to be tested. The first to be judged when something went wrong. While later legions would inherit clearer doctrines and refined ideals, the Dark Angels were shaped in uncertainty. They were experimental in ways history would rather forget, armed with weapons too dangerous, tasked with duties too grim, trusted with decisions no one else was allowed to make. They were not celebrated for restraint. They were praised for results. This is where the rot quietly began. The First Legion learned early that obedience was survival. Not the inspiring obedience of faith, but the absolute obedience of tools forged for a singular purpose. Individual identity was stripped away faster than it could form. Brother was rank. Rank was silence. Silence was safety. To hesitate was weakness. To question was defiance. And defiance, even unspoken, carried consequences that did not need to be explained. The Dark Angels did not need punishment to be visible, fear handled the rest. If you're still listening, here's what you'll gain by staying to the very end of this story. Not just an understanding of the Dark Angels' secrets, but the realization of why those secrets matter more to them than victory, more than honor, more than the Imperium itself. By the end, you won't see them as noble knights, you'll see them as prisoners of a legacy they can never escape. Long before betrayal, before heresy, before the word, fallen, became a wound that never healed, the Dark Angels were already isolated. Other legions fought beside them, but rarely with them. Their methods were too final. Their authority too broad. Their silence too complete. They were trusted precisely because no one truly understood them. And that misunderstanding became a shield the Dark Angels would later hide behind, even from themselves. They carried forbidden technologies, ancient protocols, and weapons designed to erase threats rather than defeat them. When a world was declared beyond saving, it was often the First Legion that received the order. Not to conquer, not to convert, but to end. Entire histories vanished under their campaigns, and the Dark Angels learned a dangerous lesson: if no one remembers, no one judges. That lesson would shape everything they became. Yet even then, something inside the Legion strained under the weight. Pride took root. If they were trusted with annihilation, then surely they were superior. If they were allowed to know what others were not, then surely secrecy itself was proof of worth. Brotherhood slowly transformed into hierarchy. Hierarchy into distance. Distance into suspicion. The Dark Angels did not fracture suddenly, they hardened. And hardened things do not bend. They break. This was the curse of the First Legion, not betrayal, but expectation without mercy. To fail was to stain not just oneself, but the entire lineage. To err was to prove that the Emperor's first creation was imperfect. And so the Dark Angels learned to hide imperfections instead of healing them. They buried doubt beneath ritual. They masked fear with discipline. They replaced trust with structure so rigid it could survive even when truth could not. Every dark angel born of this legacy inherits that ancient burden. Not as history, but as instinct. A sense that something must always be concealed. That survival depends on silence. That loyalty is measured not by honesty, but by how much one is willing to endure without speaking. This mindset did not begin with treachery, it enabled it. And when the moment came that the Legion would be tested beyond endurance, they were already trained to respond in the worst possible way. This is why their fall was not sudden. It was inevitable. Because when a legion is taught from its first breath that secrets are strength, that judgment is death, and that perfection matters more than truth, then the smallest fracture can become an abyss. And the dark angels were standing at the edge long before anyone noticed. Before the dark angels became the Emperor's first legion, before their oaths were etched into ceramite and bone, there was Caliban. A world that did not reward innocence. A world where survival depended on vigilance, where darkness was not a metaphor but a living presence lurking just beyond the tree line. Caliban was a place where monsters were real, where humanity survived by clinging to stone fortresses and praying that the forests would not claim them by nightfall. It was a world that taught its people one lesson above all others: if something is hidden, it is dangerous, and if it is known, it must be destroyed. It was here that Lionel Johnson was shaped. The lion did not grow among men. He grew among shadows, among beasts that hunted without mercy and killed without warning. Alone in the forests of Caliban, he learned to observe before acting, to strike without hesitation, and to trust nothing that could not be tested through violence. Survival was not granted through companionship or faith, but through absolute self-reliance. When he was eventually discovered by the Knights of Caliban, they did not find a child in need of rescue. They found a weapon already honed. This upbringing mattered more than history admits. The lion became a symbol of unity for Caliban's knightly orders, but unity came at a cost. His authority was unquestioned, his decisions final. Where others debated honor and mercy, the lion delivered results. He did not inspire loyalty through warmth or charisma, he commanded it through certainty. And certainty, when unchallenged, breeds obedience without understanding. The seeds of secrecy were planted not through malice, but through necessity. The lion did not explain himself because he did not believe explanation was required. When the Emperor arrived, Caliban believed it had been saved. The truth was far more complicated. The Imperium brought enlightenment, technology, and purpose beyond endless survival. The forests were burned away, the monsters eradicated, the old knightly orders absorbed into something far greater. Caliban was elevated from a world of fear to a symbol of progress. Yet in doing so, something essential was lost. The people of Caliban were told their old ways were obsolete, their traditions unnecessary, their vigilance outdated. Peace was promised, order was enforced, and beneath it all, resentment quietly grew. Luther embodied that resentment. Once the lion's closest companion, Luther represented what Caliban had been before the Imperium: proud, traditional, and deeply human. Where the lion looked forward, Luther looked back. Where the lion embraced the Emperor's vision without question, Luther questioned what was being sacrificed in the process. He saw a world stripped of its identity, its purpose rewritten by distant authority. And he saw himself slowly being eclipsed, not through failure, but through irrelevance. This was not yet betrayal. It was something worse: division without confrontation. The dark angels were caught between two truths they could not reconcile. Loyalty to the Emperor demanded transformation. Loyalty to Caliban demanded remembrance. The lion chose one without ever truly acknowledging the other. Those who followed him did so out of duty. Those left behind did so out of necessity. And in that separation, secrecy took on a new form, not as protection from enemies, but as protection from one another. When the Dark Angels departed Caliban to fight the Emperor's wars, they left Luther and others behind under the pretense of stewardship. In reality, it was exile disguised as honor. No accusations were spoken, no explanations offered. Silence once again replaced honesty. The Legion marched forward believing order had been maintained, never realizing that what they had truly done was abandon a wound to fester in isolation. Caliban did not forget. Stripped of purpose, denied the battlefield, and fed half-truths about the Legion's glories, those left behind began to question everything. Faith twisted into bitterness, pride curdled into resentment, and resentment, when combined with secrecy, becomes something far more dangerous than open rebellion. The idea took hold that perhaps the Lion had chosen wrong, that perhaps loyalty to the Emperor had come at the cost of betrayal to their home, and that perhaps the truth had been deliberately buried to maintain control. This was the true birth of secrecy within the Dark Angels, not a single act of treachery, but a series of silences that allowed misunderstanding to harden into conviction. The Legion never realized what they were creating. They believed distance would preserve unity. They believed silence would prevent conflict. Instead, it ensured that when conflict finally came, it would be catastrophic. Caliban became a mirror reflecting everything the Dark Angels refused to confront: pride, unresolved loyalty, and the danger of obedience without dialogue. By the time the wider galaxy was consumed by heresy, Caliban was already lost. The tragedy of the Dark Angels is not that they fell, it is that they never truly understood how they were falling. Their greatest failure was not betrayal, but the belief that silence could hold a fractured truth together indefinitely. Caliban proved that secrets do not disappear when ignored. They grow, they mutate, and when they finally surface, they do so with the force of a world breaking apart. And when Caliban finally broke, it did not merely shatter a planet. It shattered the Dark Angels forever. The fall of the Dark Angels was not marked by a single moment of clarity. There was no final warning, no unmistakable sign that history was about to fracture beyond repair. Instead, there was confusion, orders that arrived too late, messages that contradicted one another, loyalties tested under impossible circumstances. When the Horus heresy tore the Imperium apart, the Dark Angels were scattered across the galaxy, fighting wars they barely understood, serving an emperor who could no longer speak for himself. And far from the front lines, Caliban waited in silence. The truth of what happened next is something the Dark Angels have spent 10,000 years trying to erase. Luther and those left behind did not see themselves as traitors. In their minds, they were guardians, protectors of Caliban's legacy, abandoned by a legion that had forgotten its roots. They heard whispers of rebellion across the Imperium, rumors of brothers turning against brothers, of legions choosing their own truths over distant authority. And in that chaos, Luther made a choice that would damn them all. Not a sudden, violent choice, but a gradual one. A decision reinforced by isolation, resentment, and the belief that the Lion had already betrayed them first. When the Dark Angels finally returned to Caliban, they did not come seeking reconciliation. They came prepared for war. What followed was not a battle worthy of legend. It was confusion layered upon confusion. Loyalists fighting those who still believed themselves loyal. Brothers killing brothers while shouting the same oaths, invoking the same ideals, convinced that righteousness was on their side. The skies burned, the ground split, and at the heart of it all was a truth no one was prepared to face: the Dark Angels no longer knew who they were fighting for. The Lion confronted Luther, not as a brother, but as a judge. What passed between them was never recorded honestly. The official histories speak of betrayal, of treachery revealed and punished. But the reality was far more painful. There was no clean division between right and wrong, only competing loyalties hardened by years of silence. Luther was defeated, broken not just physically but spiritually, his convictions shattered by the realization of what he had helped unleash. And before answers could be extracted, before guilt could be properly assigned, Caliban itself was destroyed. The planet did not merely die. It was torn apart. Warp energies surged, time fractured, and reality itself twisted under the strain. In that cataclysm, many of the Dark Angels who had fought against the Lion were not killed. They were scattered, flung across time and space, cast into the galaxy as living reminders of a sin that could not be erased. These survivors would later be known as the Fallen, though that name would come to mean far more than simple treachery. The lion disappeared in the aftermath. Some say he was mortally wounded. Others claim he entered a state beyond death, waiting for a time yet to come. What mattered was not how he vanished, but what his absence left behind. A legion without its primarch. A truth without an ending. And a wound that could never be properly closed. In the immediate aftermath, the Dark Angels made a choice that would define their future more than any battle ever fought. They chose silence. They chose to rewrite their history, to present Caliban's destruction as an external tragedy rather than an internal failure. They chose to hunt the scattered survivors not for justice, but to prevent the truth from ever being known. The Fallen were not simply enemies, they were evidence. And evidence had to be erased. This is what makes the Dark Angels' fall unique. There was no resolution, no victory that cleansed the stain, no final accounting that allowed the Legion to move forward. The heresy ended, other chapters rebuilt, legends were written, but for the Dark Angels, the war never truly stopped. It simply changed shape. It became quieter, more secretive, more personal. Every Fallen captured was a reminder that the past still lived. That Caliban's destruction was not a closed chapter, but an ongoing sentence. And with each passing century, the weight of that sentence grew heavier. New generations of Dark Angels were taught to hate an enemy they did not understand, to pursue a hunt whose origins were deliberately obscured. They were told it was necessary, that it was righteous, that it was the only way to preserve the chapter's honor. What they were never told was that honor had already been lost. The destruction of Caliban did not cleanse the Dark Angels, it trapped them. This was the moment the Dark Angels truly became what they are today. Not a legion seeking redemption, but a legion terrified of it. After the destruction of Caliban, the Dark Angels did not collapse. They endured. On the surface, they rebuilt themselves as every loyal chapter was expected to do, adhering to the Codex, dividing their forces, continuing the Emperor's wars. To the Imperium, they appeared unchanged, resolute, disciplined, and unwavering in their devotion. But beneath that facade, something fundamental had shifted. The Dark Angels were no longer defined by what they fought for. They were defined by what they were hiding. Thus were born the Unforgiven. The Dark Angels and their successor chapters became bound together by a secret that outweighed blood, honor, and even imperial law. Officially, they were separate entities, independent chapters serving the Imperium in different regions of the galaxy. In truth, they were fragments of a single, fractured soul. Their unity was not forged in trust, but in mutual fear. Fear that the truth of Caliban, the Fallen, and the Legion's failure would one day come to light. To preserve that unity, knowledge was divided with ruthless precision. Most Dark Angels would live their entire lives without ever knowing why certain orders were given or why entire campaigns were abandoned without explanation. They would not know why some prisoners were taken alive at any cost, or why interrogator chaplains were summoned in hushed urgency whenever specific symbols or names surfaced. They would only know that these commands came from above, and that obedience was not optional. Within the chapter, hierarchy ceased to be merely a matter of rank. It became a system of containment. The inner circle emerged as the keepers of truth, though even among them, the truth was fragmented. No single mind was allowed to hold the whole of it. Knowledge was distributed like a controlled toxin, just enough to serve its purpose, never enough to destroy the bearer outright. To rise in rank was to inherit another piece of the lie, another burden that could never be shared with those below. This is what it meant to be unforgiven. A Dark Angel might fight for centuries, slay Xeno's horrors beyond counting, and still be considered unworthy of knowing why his chapter truly existed. His faith would be tested not by belief, but by endurance, by how long he could serve without asking questions. Those who proved too curious were watched. Those who persisted were removed. Some were reassigned. Some were broken down and reforged through indoctrination. Others simply vanished from record, their absence explained away through silence. The unforgiven learned to measure loyalty not by courage but by restraint. Rituals became more elaborate, not to inspire faith but to enforce conformity. Confession was encouraged, but absolution was never guaranteed. The dark angels spoke often of repentance, yet never of forgiveness. Their litanies were filled with references to guilt and vigilance, to sins unnamed and enemies unseen. Even prayer became an act of surveillance, each word spoken carefully, each hesitation noted. To outsiders, the unforgiven appeared united by shared heritage. In reality, they were united by shared paranoia. Every successor chapter understood the unspoken rule: when the call came, everything else ceased to matter. Wars would be abandoned. Allies would be left to die. Strategic victories would be sacrificed without explanation. If a whisper of the fallen emerged, the hunt took precedence over all other duties. This was not codified in imperial law. It was not sanctioned by the High Lords of Terra. It existed entirely outside official authority, and yet it was obeyed without hesitation. Because the alternative was unthinkable. If one chapter broke ranks, if one voice spoke too loudly, the entire structure would collapse. The Imperium would not ask for explanations. It would demand punishment. And the Dark Angels knew, deep down, that they could not survive the judgment of an Imperium that tolerated no deviation from absolute loyalty. So the lie deepened. New generations were indoctrinated into traditions whose original meanings were deliberately obscured. Symbols became sacred without explanation. Orders were followed without understanding. The hunt for the fallen transformed from a mission into an identity. To be unforgiven was to accept that redemption was not a destination, but a myth used to justify endless suffering. This was the price of survival. The Dark Angels did not seek to heal the wound left by Caliban. They cauterized it with secrecy and called it duty. They told themselves that the Imperium must never know, that the truth would do more harm than good. And in doing so, they ensured that the horror of their existence would never truly end. Because a lie that must be defended forever becomes a prison, and the unforgiven are its most devoted inmates. For a Dark Angel, existence is not measured in years or victories, but in endurance. There is no moment when the burden lifts, no threshold where service becomes lighter. From the instant a neophyte takes his vows, he enters a life defined by pressure, constant, unrelenting, and deliberately isolating. The chapter does not merely demand obedience. It demands silence, patience, and the ability to live with unanswered questions that would drive lesser minds into madness. Training never truly ends. Every Dark Angel is conditioned to believe that perfection is not a goal, but a minimum requirement. Any deviation, however small, is recorded, studied, and remembered. Not as punishment, but as data. Weakness is not condemned publicly, it is noted quietly. Improvement is mandatory. Failure is unacceptable. Praise is rare, and when it comes, it is cold and measured, stripped of warmth or reassurance. The message is clear: you are never enough, and you must never believe that you are. Brotherhood exists, but it is restrained. Dark Angels fight beside one another with flawless coordination, yet personal bonds are discouraged. Friendship creates vulnerability. Vulnerability invites doubt. Doubt threatens silence. Conversations remain formal, emotions carefully regulated. Even humor, when it appears, is subdued and cautious. A Dark Angel learns to speak as though someone is always listening, because someone often is. Observation is constant. Evaluation never stops. Sleep offers no refuge. Dreams are shaped by hypno-indoctrination, ritualized meditation, and relentless repetition of doctrine. Visions of enemies blend with symbols whose meanings are deliberately left unexplained. Guilt is reinforced without context, creating an emotional weight that cannot be rationalized or resolved. The Dark Angel is taught to feel responsible without ever being told why. It is an effective method. Guilt motivates vigilance. Confusion suppresses rebellion. Faith, within the chapter, is not comforting. The emperor is revered, but not as a source of mercy. He is invoked as a judge, distant, silent, and absolute. Prayers emphasize vigilance over hope, obedience over love. A dark angel does not pray for salvation. He prays not to fail. He prays not to be noticed for the wrong reasons. He prays that whatever secret the chapter guards never becomes his burden to carry. Discipline governs every moment. Armor is maintained not just as a tool of war, but as a symbol of control. Rituals of preparation are exacting, repeated with obsessive precision. Weapons are inspected beyond necessity. Every action is deliberate. Randomness is unacceptable. Chaos, in any form, is the enemy, and that includes emotional chaos. A dark angel is taught to master his thoughts as completely as his blade, to suppress curiosity before it can take root. And yet, curiosity persists. It manifests in glances held a moment too long, in questions half-formed and then abandoned, in the quiet realization that some orders do not align with the wider Imperium's priorities. A dark angel may notice how often missions change suddenly, how frequently certain targets are taken alive against all tactical logic. He may observe how senior officers speak in coded language, how certain names cause immediate tension, how interrogator chaplains arrive without explanation and depart with prisoners whose fate is never discussed. These observations are dangerous. The chapter does not need to explicitly threaten its warriors. The structure itself enforces compliance. Advancement offers answers, but only at the cost of innocence. To rise is to accept that you will one day be asked to do something you cannot justify, something that will haunt you long after the battle ends. Many dark angels sense this truth long before they reach that point. Some hope they will never be chosen. Others believe, mistakenly, that knowledge will bring clarity. It never does. The daily life of a dark angel is an exercise in restraint. Restraint of emotion, restraint of thought, restraint of doubt. They are not encouraged to ask what they are protecting, only that it must be protected at all costs. This creates warriors of exceptional discipline, but also of profound isolation. They stand among the Imperium's finest, yet remain fundamentally alone. This is the hidden horror of their existence. Not the battles, not the enemies, but the slow erosion of self that comes from serving a cause that cannot be explained, defending a truth that must remain buried, and living every day with the unspoken understanding that loyalty, within the dark angels, is measured not by what you are willing to die for, but by what you are willing to never speak aloud. Within the dark angels, there exists a boundary few ever cross, and fewer still survive unchanged. It is not marked by armor color or rank insignia, but by knowledge, knowledge so corrosive that it reshapes the mind around it. This boundary is known as the inner circle, and to enter it is not a reward. It is a sentence. Those who pass beyond it do not gain clarity. They inherit guilt. The inner circle is not a council in the traditional sense. It is a filtration system, designed to ensure that no one individual ever understands the whole truth. Each member knows just enough to obey, enough to fear, enough to enforce silence on others. Their lives are defined by vigilance not against external enemies, but against internal collapse. Every decision is weighed against a single question: will this protect the secret, or expose it? At the center of this system stand the interrogator chaplains. To the Imperium, a chaplain is a spiritual guide, a keeper of morale and faith. Among the dark angels, this role has been twisted into something far darker. Interrogator chaplains are not shepherds of the soul. They are its executioners. They do not seek repentance for the sake of forgiveness. They seek confession for the sake of containment. When a fallen is captured, it is not justice that awaits him. It is ritualized annihilation of identity. The interrogator chaplains believe, truly believe, that suffering is purification. Pain is not a means to an end, it is the end. The fallen are subjected to relentless interrogation, their minds and bodies broken down piece by piece in the hope of extracting not just information, but submission. Confession is demanded, not because it redeems, but because it validates the Dark Angel's worldview. Every admission of guilt reinforces the lie that betrayal was absolute, that no ambiguity remains. But ambiguity is all that remains. What the Dark Angels never admit, what they cannot afford to admit, is that many of the fallen do not see themselves as traitors. Some believed they were loyal until the end. Some were confused, misled, or trapped by circumstances beyond their control. And this is why the interrogations never truly end. Because if even one fallen were proven innocent, the entire structure would collapse under the weight of its own cruelty. So the process continues. Those within the inner circle witness these rituals not as outsiders but as participants. They tell themselves it is necessary. That the Imperium must be protected from the truth. That the chapter's survival justifies any atrocity committed in silence. Over time, the distinction between duty and obsession disappears. The hunt for the fallen becomes less about justice and more about reaffirmation, proof that the lie is still holding. And what of the Dark Angels who learn too much? They are not punished openly. That would invite questions. Instead, they are absorbed deeper into the system. Given greater responsibility, greater authority, greater isolation. Their loyalty is tested not by temptation, but by complicity. Once you have ordered suffering in the name of secrecy, once you have chosen silence over mercy, there is no way back. The inner circle does not recruit. It consumes. This is the cruel genius of the Dark Angel's structure. No one is forced to betray their conscience outright. They are guided, step by step, into redefining it. At each stage, the cost feels manageable. A secret kept, a question ignored, a prisoner handed over without explanation. By the time the full weight of the truth is felt, the bearer is already too entangled to escape it. Faith, in this context, becomes a weapon turned inward. The Emperor is invoked not as a symbol of hope, but as an authority that demands sacrifice without explanation. The Dark Angels convince themselves that their actions, however brutal, are justified by the greater good. Yet the greater good is never clearly defined, only implied, always just out of reach. And so the cycle continues, driven by fear of exposure rather than belief in righteousness. The interrogator chaplains do not doubt their purpose. That is what makes them terrifying. They see themselves as necessary evils, guardians standing between the Imperium and a truth that would fracture it. But in guarding that truth, they have become its prisoners. Every scream they ignore, every confession they extract, tightens the chains binding them to the past. They are no longer preventing disaster. They are maintaining it. This is the darkest horror of the Dark Angels. Not that they commit acts of cruelty in secret, but that they do so convinced they have no other choice. The hunt for the fallen is not a mission. It is a compulsion. It overrides strategy, doctrine, and even survival. When the Dark Angels receive a whisper, a symbol, a name, a fragment of intelligence suggesting one of the fallen still lives, everything else becomes irrelevant. Wars are left unfinished. Allies are abandoned without explanation. Entire battlefronts collapse because the Dark Angels simply vanish, drawn away by a truth only they are allowed to pursue. To the Imperium, these disappearances are baffling but tolerated. The Dark Angels have earned centuries of trust through blood and victory. Their silence is mistaken for stoicism. Their absences are excused as classified priorities. No one suspects that an entire chapter, along with its successors, is driven by a single, unrelenting fear, that one day, the wrong person will hear the wrong confession. The fallen are hunted not because they are the greatest threat to humanity, but because they are the greatest threat to the Dark Angels themselves. Each encounter is treated with ritual intensity. Targets are captured alive whenever possible, regardless of the cost. Enemy strongholds are obliterated to ensure no witnesses remain. Civilians, Imperial forces, even other space marines are left with unanswered questions and half-finished wars. The Dark Angels tell themselves this is necessary. That the Imperium must never know. That the truth would destroy more than it saves. And yet, with every hunt, the cost rises. The Dark Angels begin to resemble the very thing they fear, a force operating beyond accountability, answerable only to its own doctrine. Their loyalty to the Emperor becomes indistinguishable from loyalty to their secret. Their devotion to humanity becomes conditional. Entire populations are weighed against the risk of exposure and found expendable. This is the final transformation. By this point, the Dark Angels are no longer seeking redemption. They are preserving a version of reality in which redemption is impossible. The past cannot be confronted, only contained. The fallen must never be allowed to speak freely, not because their words are lies, but because some of them may speak truths too complex, too painful, and too human to fit the narrative the Dark Angels have enforced for 10,000 years. And looming over all of this is the shadow of the Lion. The possibility of his return is not a comfort. It is a terror. For if Lionel Johnson were to awaken, to walk among his sons once more, the lie would face judgment at last. He would see what the First Legion has become. He would hear the confessions. He would ask the questions no one else dares to ask. And the Dark Angels do not know whether they fear his condemnation, or his forgiveness, more. Because forgiveness would mean the lie was never necessary. And if the lie was unnecessary, then everything that followed, the torture, the obsession, the abandoned worlds, was not duty. It was choice. This is the final horror of the Dark Angels' existence. They are trapped not by the Imperium, not by the Emperor, not even by their Primarch's absence, but by their own refusal to let the past end. They endure, they fight, they win, and all the while, they remain unforgiven, guarding a secret that has consumed their identity, their purpose, and their soul. The galaxy will never know the full truth, and the Dark Angels will make certain of it, even if it costs them everything.